5264, Mr. Chair.
5264. And we can start with the staff summary on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Melissa Van Gorkum, staff to the committee. The bill before you, Senate Bill 5264, relates to declaring January as Chinese American History Month. By way of background, in 2000, Washington State declared May of each year to be Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. According to the 2010 census, the Asian population grew faster than any other race group in the United States between 2000 and 2010. As of the 2010 census, there were 94,198 people of Chinese descent alone living in Washington. Under the bill before you, the state would declare that January of each year is Chinese American History Month and encourage public schools to designate a time for appropriate activities in commemoration of the lives, history, achievements, and contributions of Chinese Americans. A fiscal note was not requested. There's no known companion. That concludes my remarks unless there are any questions.
Questions of Melissa? I see heads shaking, so I guess that means no. Has Senator Wagner joined us?
I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Welcome to the committee, Senator, and tell us a little bit about Senate Bill 5264.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank Chair Hunt, Vice Chair Cooter, who also has signed on to this bill. Thank you for that. And Ranking Member Wilson for hearing this bill. When this bill was brought to me, I was actually kind of surprised that it didn't already exist, because we honor lots of different ethnic minorities and people from other countries who have come here and gained citizenship throughout the state. So I was a little surprised we didn't have a time for Chinese American Month, but I thought about why that is. I think it's primarily because it has become part of our society automatically. And we think about Chinese New Year as sort of being something that we all are familiar with in Chinese food. And so I think we just overlooked a segment of the population. And the intent of this bill is really just to provide a conduit for information and learning about these great Americans. I think Washington State's done a very good job in facing our history. We've learned, we've put emphasis on the Japanese internment. We've learned about the valiant Japanese Americans who fought in the 442nd. And there's just so many parallels in the Chinese American community that people don't know about and need to learn about. And I think this is a good way to place proper emphasis on that group. And I'll just throw out a couple of facts. I know we often think about the Chinese and the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, and sometimes it just kind of ends there. But Chinese Americans were involved in building our country and our culture in so many different ways. I don't know how many of you know, but Chinese Americans fought in the Civil War on both sides. So those are types of information that I think are not widely known to certainly the general population and to our school children. And I hope that this provides a mechanism so we can build our knowledge of all the great contributions. And I'll pause there for questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions of Senator Wagner? I would just add, you talk about our Chinese American history. We look at Ruby Chow and Wing Luke and various other leaders, including Gary Locke, who was our governor and a cabinet member and our ambassador to China. So we have a very rich Chinese history. My first roommate when I was teaching in Pasco was a Chinese American who grew up in the Chinese section of Seattle. And it was wonderful to visit because his mother was a great cook. So thank you. Anybody else? Okay, we have people trying to. Yes, sir, Senator Hasagawa.
Oh yeah, no. Since you were citing some interesting historical facts, we passed a resolution on the floor a couple of years ago honoring Mr. Boeing's first engineer that designed his first viable aircraft, whose name was Wang Su from China.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. And everybody is signed in pro, and so if you could we'll put a timer on at 2 minutes for a maximum, and let's hear your support for the bill.
Okay, I just have one comment to make too.
Oh, yes.
We do have a rich history of, major contributions by our Chinese American citizens. We also have a history of discrimination. And you may recall that this legislature fixed the wrongful death statute to include children of foreign nationals, to allow those parents, when children of foreign nationals were killed. The purpose of that exclusion in the first place was to exclude Chinese American and Chinese population who were here helping to build the railroad. That goes back to the 1800s that was in effect. And it took us over 100 years to right that wrong, but we finally did it. So that's the other part of our history that we also need to face and to deal with. So thank you very much, Senator Wagner, for bringing the bill.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, if I could just build on Senator Cooter's remarks for a minute. The Chinese Exclusion Acts of 1882 are not widely known in our history, but that was an act that was specifically targeting Chinese Americans and trying to limit their population in the United States.
Yes, you're right. Thank you.
Would you like me to proceed calling up
Please
the
proceed.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Linda Yang, Kan Chi, and Terry Mao, and on deck, April Lee, Aaron Sun, and Anthony Cheng.
And again, turn your video on and use the what do we call it, crowd view or whatever, so you can see the timer. Gallery view.
Can you hear me? Hello. Thank you, Chair Hunt, and the members of the committee. My name is Terry Mao. I'm here today to testify in support of SB 5264. First, I'd like to thank Senator Wagner for sponsoring this bill. Chinese people have been migrating into the United States, especially state of Washington, for over 1.5 centuries. So in the last 2 decades, high-tech companies in state of Washington attracted more and more Chinese people. More and more Chinese people from all over the world to settle down and contribute to the local industry and economy. As one of them, I migrated to state of Washington when I got a job here in Amazon 7 years ago, and I have witnessed the exploding of Chinese communities here in Seattle area. I believe this bill will help people in state of Washington get a much better understanding in both Chinese culture and Chinese history to avoid any bias and discrimination. Also, I believe this bill will help Chinese communities share their culture with other local communities and increase our diversity and friendship. Please support 52 and 64.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So Linda Yang and Kan Chi is up next, but if you could mute yourself for now, we're hearing some background noise. Go ahead, Linda.
Hi, thank you, Chair Hunt and member of the committee. My name is Linda Yang, and I'm here today to testify in support of SB 5264. First of all, I'd like to thank Senator Wagner for sponsoring this bill. I'd also thank committee members Senator Cooter and Senator Hasagawa for co-sponsoring this bill. This is a long overdue bill that matters a lot to members of the Chinese community. Chinese Americans played a vital role in Washington state. The Transcontinental Railroad, which brought opportunity and prosperity to this region, was built by Chinese laborers. Sadly, after many Chinese laborers worked under harsh conditions, many gave their lives to build the railroad. They were expelled from the state and this country under the Chinese Exclusion Act, which lasted for more than 60 years. The contributions of those Chinese railroad workers have been largely ignored by the history. Few are aware of our country and state's dark past, including the Chinese Exclusion Act and other violent repression, murder, and discrimination against Chinese Americans. There is a vacuum in our school's curriculum. I have contacted several school districts, and none has a comprehensive curriculum on Chinese histories. Chinese kids are not learning histories of their ancestors from schools. Rather, they heard stories from parents like me. Last year's Senate Resolution 8684 honoring Chinese Americans was a starting point, and this year we're hoping this bill will be a step in the right direction to bring attention to the long and rich history of Chinese Americans and to our lives, contributions, and sacrifices. Lastly, I would suggest an amendment to expand the bill's influence to beyond public schools. So Section 2 of the bill would read as, educational institutions, public entities, and private organizations are encouraged to designate time for appropriate activities in the commemoration of Chinese American History Month and the lives, history, achievement, and the contributions of the Chinese Americans. Thank you.
Thank you. Kanchi, welcome.
Hello, dear Chair Hunt, Ranking Member Wilson, committee members. My name is Kan Chu. I'm here to testify in support of Senate Bill 5264. My thanks go to bill sponsor Senator Wagner and two co-sponsors in this committee, Senator Kuder and Senator Hasagawa. I came here as a student from China in early 90s. Facing many challenges, we always consider America the land of free and equal opportunities. Even with language barriers, zero connections, multi-year-long waiting process, we still managed to settle down and raise our family in this wonderful state. My generation might be one of the luckiest. West Coast saw its first Chinese immigrants during Gold Rush era. As soon as the last segment of Intercontinental Railroad was nailed, the Chinese Exclusion Act was enacted in 1882 and lasted for more than 60 years. It was only rescinded in 1943 as it became a huge embarrassment in World War II when China was a major US ally. Unfortunately, history took another turn only a few years later when the communists took over in 1949 after a bloody civil war. The border was sealed for another 30 years until the state-controlled economy was heading to one disaster after another, and the leaders realized they had to open the doors and embrace the free market economy again in 1979. And that year, I was in elementary school. America is a great country, and I'm proud to raise my family here. And Chinese today are facing backlash against immigrants. An important part of helping to stop this feeling attack is through education, and we can understand more about each other. I applaud that this bill declares Chinese History Month. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Aaron Sun, Anthony Chang, and April Lee. And on deck, Mr. Chair, we have Emily Shi and Nathan Kui. And we have 47 signed in not wishing to testify, Mr. Chair, 43 pro, 3 con, and 1 other. Mr. Sun, go ahead.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody in between. I'm here to testify. I would like to support 5269 acts. So first, I would like to thank you, Washington governors and legislatures start paying attention to Chinese communities by introducing Chinese cultural influence in the shape of American Chinese History Month. This is a great start. We, as a representative of the Chinese communities who live in Washington, are definitely looking for more, and with a strong faith of Washington governments to help and unite Chinese community in any shape or forms. In the fact of Chinese being a great nation, in the fact of Chinese in this great nations, equivalent to living a hard life, is not well known because of the quietness of Asian culture. Historically, American Chinese, as many of you guys have mentioned, a contribution to greater nations is often discredited, such as the little public knowledge of the construction of the Great Trans-American Railroad under Chinese Americans' effort. Chinese Americans' brutal unfair treatment is also dismissed, such as Chinese Exclusion Act, which everybody has mentioned, leaves hundreds of hardworking Chinese people dead and set their family apart. For a long period of time, large percentage of Chinese Americans are still living under poverty line despite the great effort and suffer we and our ancestors have endured. Even today, Chinese American COVID death rate is higher than others, but no public attention. We cannot allow this unfair treatments happen anymore in this nation under guard. We definitely love to support the government to educate Chinese history and how hard the life people have been living in. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Emily, welcome. Go ahead and begin.
Dear committee chair and committee members, my name is Emily Shi and I support Senate Bill 5264. I support it because I myself had completely no idea of what happened to Chinese Americans when they built the Transcontinental Railroad. I did not know that the Chinese Americans were treated badly. They were underpaid and weren't given any credit for working on building the railroad. Many Chinese Americans were dedicated to their work, but they died. Despite their hard work, most people don't even know about it, and there are very few who do. If people continue not knowing about the history of Chinese Americans, the word will not spread, and once those who do know about the history of the Chinese Americans die, the thought might fade from existence. This bill makes it so that public schools will tell children about the history of Chinese Americans, and more people will know about it. But this only occurs to public schools. If I were to stay in private schools my entire education, I might not know about the history of Chinese Americans. I feel it is better if both private and public schools make sure students know about the history of Chinese Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. How old are you?
I am 9.
Wow, way to go. I think you just guaranteed passage of this bill. Thank you very much.
All right, we have Nathan Kui, and he is our last testifier, Mr. Chair. Nathan, are you there?
There he is.
Go ahead and begin.
We
see you, but we can't hear you.
Thank you, Chair Hunt and members in support of SB5264. I'm in 4th grade at Cherry Crest Elementary in Bellevue, Washington, in Mid-Southern class. I did not learn about the Chinese American history in class. Both my parents are Chinese. I have 2 older brothers. One is 19, the other is 23. My parents are excited about the Senate Bill 5264. My parents put me in Chinese class every Friday. I have 2 next door neighbors. The one left side is Eric Fong. I go to his house to play on his Xbox a lot. My other next door neighbor, well, I don't know his name, but last summer when I was playing baseball in my backyard, I hit the ball over my fence and it ended up in his backyard. By the way, he has a dog, so when I came to ask him, my mom went to Interlake High School to the tennis course to play tennis. I accidentally dropped a tennis ball in front of a woman with a dog on a leash. Yes, it chomped on the ball, and it wouldn't let go. The woman finally got the dog to let go of the ball. It was covered in spit, so we had to throw it away. Sometimes we go skiing with my friends, Jimmy, his sister Ellie, and Emily, who are all Chinese American. And at one time, Jimmy literally forgot his skis, so he and Ellie went home. His dad said that it was a lesson learned, so we got to go on a blue slope, which Jimmy's afraid of. Thank you for the Chinese American history bill, and thanks for hearing my testimony.
Thank you, Nathan. That was wonderful. What a team, Nathan and Emily. I think let's hear it for them. Yay. Okay. Oh, that's applaud. Yeah. Only thing I can say, it's almost time I could say gung hei fa choi, but that's the only Chinese I know. So, all right. Do we have anything else before us? I want to thank all of you. Have a good weekend. We will see you next week. And thank all of you for taking time and being patient to to join us and to share your wisdom. Special thanks to Nathan and Emily. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.